to Real People, Real Matters. This is Diana Tulchinsky with my first guest, Tom Kloempken. Tom, please tell me your earlier life in Chicago.
I was raised in Jefferson Park on the northwest side and spent many a year there. In fact, through high school, I was in that area and ended up staying there until, very honestly, I was married. And that's when we eventually moved into another part of the city of Chicago.
Oh, great. Where did you go to high school?
I went to Loyola Academy. We were the second last class out of what they called Sheridan Road, where the university is, and they moved a year after up here to Wilmette, near here, right by.
And how did you get your first job? What was your first vocation or your first?
Well, I really had to do some thinking about that, and I was sort of rehearsing last night at home and things like that, and making notes, because my first job, very honestly, was I think I was still in grade school, and I ended up bagging groceries at the local National Tea store, and I couldn't forget it, because very honestly, the first day I came back home after working a few hours after school, and here was my grandma sitting in the kitchen with my mother, and Grandma, who was at that time in her, I think she was early 70s, she said to me, "Well, Tom, how was the job?" And I said, "Oh, everything was great," but I said everything was fine except this little old lady that was in her early 60s gave me a bad time about needing a triple bag, and she just burst out in laughter, because here she was already in her 70s, and I was referring to as this old lady, and I'll never forget it.
Yeah. Interesting. So how did you move up the vocation?
Yes,
pay
that was
ladder?
one of the first. I did a number of things, various things along the way, and kept busy, because very frankly, my mom and dad could use a little bit of the extra cash that I was able to pick up, because I was one of four at home, and I was the oldest at the time, and I ended up working some summers at the one place was Mount Prospect Golf Course. I did that for a while, and another golf course also, and in the blazing heat, and I was never very comfortable in the July and August working out there, so
Nice.
that was some of my early jobs.
Tell me, how did you get into electronic motors? Like, did you get into technical skills at all later on?
For later on in life, it was really sort of a change, because for some reason, I always had a liking for both electrical and mechanical. I was just that way, and people were shocked, because my dad didn't know which end of a screwdriver to hold. And so I ended up doing a lot of these things around the house and fixing things, and that's where it all started. And it was sort of an accident that I ended up doing what I was doing. So, but it was neat. I can remember even a dear friend of my parents. I rewired their entire whole apartment, as I recall, was 5 or 6 rooms. And the building's still standing today, and it has not burned up since.
Interesting. So what did you do after Loyola Academy?
After Loyola?
Yeah, after you.
After Loyola, I went to IIT, Illinois Institute of Technology. I only ended there about a year and a half. I wish I would have studied a little bit harder, but very frankly, I was a commuter, and it did not work out the greatest for me, and luckily other things fell into place after that. So I was at IIT for a while. I had started actually in their biology class, because I had the crazy idea that I was going to become a doctor, and I wasn't doing very well at dissecting and things like that, but that did not work out, and I ended up then going over to Wright Junior College, but also doing some work.
Interesting. How did you get involved with engineering and everything else?
Well, that's the funny thing because it all sort of changed. What happened was I had gone off to eventually went off to the Air Force, and it took me a year and a half to get in at the time when I applied to the Air Force, and it was all kinds of exams and everything else, and it took a year and a half of these exams both here and away, and I was supposed to I went off to navigator school, and they decided, because they were looking for excuses to drum people out, that after 2 weeks down in the heart of Lackland Air Force Base in Florida, in Texas rather, that I was not fit because my feet were flat. So I said, what flat feet have to do with flying an airplane? I still haven't figured that one out. So, but it ended up that I came out of that, and it some other things I did, and it was just at some point that I decided that I wanted to go on, and I ended up actually coming back because I had looked at going to work at IBM, and I interviewed there, and they said, why don't you get your Air Force out of the way first, or service? So I did, and I came back a couple months later and said, okay, I got my service out of the way. So I went to work for IBM for 12 years, and actually in an administrative type job in management. And the company was a fraction of the size that it is today, but it was very interesting. And then I decided I had to do something else at some point because I was never going to make chairman of the board at IBM. So I ended up looking at some more, and it was actually my wife had suggested that I go see a friend of hers, and I ended up getting into the industry that involves large electric motors and gears and all that type of thing. It's called the power transmission business.
And what is the power transmission, like what is the energy behind that?
Well,
what is the mechanics?
What it is, Diana, is that the type of customers that I had, I actually traveled 4 states, and the customers were people like, the biggest one is what was called the machine tool industry. They made big and small machines, mainly for cutting metal, and these machines were typically used. The largest segment of the business was to sell to the automotive manufacturers, and they were to make like engines for cars and things of that nature. And then there was Caterpillar and the people like that, and J.I. Case, and also they also sold a lot to like Boeing and those people for making airplanes. But that's where this machine tool segment was very involved. But these products got used in other places. It was very unique, and it was, frankly, it was a lot of fun. I had a grand time selling as a what was called a manufacturer's rep, where I was self-employed, and I'd have to go find companies that I would sell for.
What major companies were using your technology?
The biggest customers that I sold directly to was the largest machine tool builder in the United States, because a lot of that business was in Rockford and Cincinnati. Cincinnati was not my territory, but Rockford was, and as a result, I had to go to Rockford. Every Thursday I was in Rockford, so I was sort of a commuter there. And there was also a lot of industry up in Wisconsin also that did that, so I had them sort of spread out in a few places, but it was very interesting. But the other part of it is also I was in the infancy of when they were changing how you operated an electric motor. The electric motors, they changed to the solid state from the old, if we speak of like the old vacuum tubes and things like that. And one of my wonderful customers that I'll never forget was a place called Anheuser-Busch in St. Louis that I did enough with Anheuser that I had to go down there every month and pick up some more orders out of them, because I brought them into the technology that was needed to supply variable speed motors, because bottles and can lines in their factory have to go fast and slow and things of that nature. So we did that. But there was a lot of various industries that made use of the products that I had to sell. And it was neat. And the paper industry up in northern Wisconsin also was a wonderful customer of mine.
Interesting. When did you get into car sales?
Car sales? Well, that happened after I shut down, and I think it was 2003. I saw the business starting to leave the country. First of all, the first thing I saw, even in the late 80s and 1990s, was the manufacturing leaving the city, because I had a lot of customers inside the city, and those were disappearing first. And then you started to see others start to leave because business was going to China and things like that. Originally, we were worried about losing business to Japan. It wasn't Japan. It turned out to be China and things like that. So I ended up in 03 shutting down my rep business, and I got quickly bored. And so what happened was that I had bought all my cars at one dealership that is fact up here, in fact, of the Breedeman family. And it ended up that they said, hey, why don't you come to work? So I ended up in the car sales. What had actually happened is they were being pushed by their corporate offices to get involved in the internet sales. And, excuse me. And what happened was that they said, come in for an interview, and I ended up starting the next day, I think it was, and they said, here's a book on cars, and there's your desk up in the front window, and you are our internet salesman, because what was happening is they were ignoring all the sales leads that they were getting that were coming in on the internet, and they didn't see the future at it at the time. So they decided I was going to be the guy to do it. And so it ended up, it was very interesting business. In a matter of 1 year, I became the third highest salesman in their office, but it was also 60 some hours a week.
Oh,
so
great.
it wasn't quite retirement.
How important is the Lexus brand in the cars? Why are they so outstanding compared to other BMWs and Subarus and Nissans and Toyotas?
Well, it has all changed quite a bit too. Even today, it's like others. You look at even what's happened to the Buick. The Buick, to me, was always the car that Grandpa was driving. Yes. And things like that. Because I was driving 40,000 miles a year, and I had to get from point A to point B to P. I try to average usually in a day about 8 customer calls a day. And so I wasn't speeding, but I didn't want to get behind Grandpa at the light. So one of my rules was if there was 2 lanes at the light, I never got behind a Buick, because Grandpa was driving it at the time. So they've had to change their image. Lexus is going through the same thing, where just the plain old black and white cars and maybe a few silver cars, they've had to go to some wild colors and things like that. So the whole business has just changed there quite a bit as to what appeals, and it's just completely different from what it was when I started there in 03.
Interesting. And when did you move to the Glenview area?
Glenview area, actually we moved 17 years ago when we downsized, and it was just my wife that was pushing and said, we're ready to move, and if you're not ready to move, too bad, because I want to get out and downsize from the big home we had with our 4 daughters. So one night while I was working at Breedeman, it was about 7 or 8 o'clock, and she called and said, you got to come over and look at this place, because it's going tonight and there's one other bidder, and I really want this particular unit. And I said, well, I can't. She says, you've got to come over. And so I ended up going over there that night, And I learned a lesson that night, and that was what I always tell people being a salesman. I said, is the one thing, never kick the dog. And the reason people say, what do you mean by that? And I said, well, what happened was that we bid on this place that night, and the other people that were bidding bid the same amount. So then later that night they came back and said, okay, you have to bid it again, and we did. And the second time around, we also bid the same number, a higher number, and then it was up to the seller, is the law. And what happened was that the lady decided to give the house to us. And we scratched our head for a while trying to figure out why she would give it to us, because we're no different than the other couple. And the big difference was that when we walked in the house to look it over, I got down and pet her best friend because she was living alone, and her best friend was that dog on the floor.
Ah,
And ever since then, I say, don't kick the dog.
interesting.
Yeah.
How did you become part of the Heatherfield Association, Board Association?
It actually got started because we're in a 4-unit building, and we in this Heatherfield area here, we have 172 of these what are called attached homes that are 3 and 4-unit buildings. And the man at the other end, the couple that lived at the other end, was a gentleman that's well known around Glenview. He's now deceased. Was a fellow by the name of Jim Smirlis. And Jim started pushing me right away to get involved. Jim had been the top dog here in Glenview for a while, and he also owns some property that he managed for the family. But Jim and I became very good friends, and he was on the board at the time. In fact, he was president of our homeowners at one point also. And he just said, Tom, you've got to get involved. And that's what sort of started it. So I was on there, and the reason partly was I was president of the Homeowners Association where we used to live in Sauganash. And I also spent a year as being president in a place called Edgebrook, which was on the other side of the Edens Expressway. So I had the background, and it was too bad he found that out very quickly. So that's why he decided that Kloempken should go run, and I've been involved practically all the time since then. I got a little burned out at one time and had to take a rest for a year, in which my wife got on the board for a while, but I'm back. Been back on it, and it frankly it's been great because we have a wonderful we have a board of 5 people, and it's great to have 5 people, especially in this day and age, that can work together.
Nice.
We've just done a lot of good things, and we took on one of our major programs was to re-roof all of our homes. And we did it over a 3-year program because our homes are 21 years old. And we had on all of the 3 and 4 unit, we had what was called wood shake. And the wood shake at 21 years, it was also builder's grade, very frankly, so it wasn't the best in the world. But it was, in windstorms, you'd find some back in the yards.
Mm-hmm.
So we took on a program of replacing all the roofs in there, and I had to, come to the village here to get approval, first of all, to change for the types of roof. And the program just went super well, and last year we did the largest segment. We did 112 homes last year, and it just went great. And it was a $3 million program, and the people were super. I mean, you always have a few that know better, but we got an engineering firm, and it's just been wonderful. But dealing with the village here it's just really great to work with. Okay.
Thank you, Tom.
Okay.
Yeah, like it's been really fascinating, all these like different like renovations in Glenview, and yeah, this is a wonderful area.
Yeah, well, we're still, we've got some people that are doing renovations too and things like that, but we still, because it's a planned unit development, we have to uh, they have to follow certain rules in the book. And that's where it's sometimes a little bit of challenge, but we pass that on to our property manager. And being a property manager to me takes all the patience in the world. It's been well worth it. So.
Oh, good. Please tell me a story of how you helped a senior with like a senior scam.
Oh,
And how
yes.
do you know the police department?
Not everything is in the job description that I happen to have. And in fact, nobody's ever given me a job description. But one of the things that I stress an awful lot at our board meetings, which were also during COVID, we were going to Zoom sessions, and it was on that. Now we're able to go back, is that the concern is about people being taken. There's just all kinds of scams, and the problem being where we live, it's normally the people like ourselves that have downsized. They've moved from the homes in Winnetka and Wilmette and the Kenilworth in that area and come over here, and they're seniors, a lot of seniors, and the more senior you are, these firms get away with things. And actually what happened in this one case is that one of my neighbors down the street was convinced, and I don't know whether it started on the internet or what, that she had won $7 million in the Florida lottery.
Wow.
And I got a call from her husband. They were both in their early 90s. And what happened was that her husband called me and just said, Tom, I need you to come over. And I went over there immediately that day. It was about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and sat down with them at the kitchen table. And my sales approach did not work. I, for an hour, tried to convince her that it was a scam. I finally said, hey, I got to go home, do some checking. I didn't want to be in front of them with it, but I went home and did hold of 911 here. And ended up, make a long story short, they put me in touch with one of the men in the police force here. The guy was phenomenal. He said, I'll meet you in front of their house in a half hour. And he came out, and he said, okay, let's go in. And this policeman spent an hour with me at the kitchen table with this couple. And so these people are now in an assisted living situation. And it was great. But people laugh and say, Kloempken, this wasn't in your job description.
Yes, like a little bit of like police detective work.
Yes.
Were you involved in any Glenview activities, like in Village of Glenview activities?
Yes, I was. In fact, one of the things that I got involved with the year before last is I took the course that Joel Deloff put on, was on a broad brush of all the departments in the Village of Glenview. And it was very interesting. And after taking that, I think it was a 7-week, every Thursday night, he urged me to take the Police Academy class, which I did in 2022. And that was a 10-week. And that was just phenomenal. It was just being on the board back in Heatherfield. I felt it was something that I could gain some information that would be good, and to work with our people and things of that nature. So the class was just fantastic. Every one of them, the aspect, learning all the things, and you see how difficult the policeman's job is. It is one tough job. I just fantastic to see. It's great.
And are you still involved in church activities? And are you partly involved, like is your family involved in local Glenview charities and archdiocese, satellites?
Yes, we are still somewhat, though I've wound down a little bit too, because I was one that showed up with my toolbox over there too, and I had helped to somewhat over there with various things, and we are still somewhat involved. And actually, we're also involved in a group that is run out of what's called Catholic Charities in downtown Chicago, and that's for group for because of a situation in our family for survivors of suicide. And my wife and I have been involved in that for well over 12 years or something like that, and have run our monthly meetings to help people that are faced with this difficult situation.
Thank you, Tom, for this conversation about the Glenview area.
It's just my wife and I have been just so happy with being up here. We made tremendous friends just around Heatherfield, but also at our church. We go to OLPH, as it's called up here, and it's just been just great, to the point that come the day that we maybe have to downsize again, we still want to stay in the area. Everything has been great. The support that we get, working with the people here in Village Hall and everything, it is the best as far as I'm concerned.
Thank you for watching Real People, Real Matters. This is Diana Tulchinsky with my guest, Tom Kloempken. Please watch us again.